What's up, everybody? I am Hector Luis Alamos, senior editor here at Latino Rebels. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Melissa, who runs the adoptee underscore thoughts account on Instagram. She's also an adoptee herself, transracial, transnational adoptee, and an adoption educator. We're going to be talking today about the Bring Chanel Home case. I see now that I miss spelled the title. Priscilla Luna here, who set this conversation up using the hashtag Bring Chanel Home. If you don't know about it, well, here's Melissa. Maybe I'll have her explain it. About a Alaska Native child who's being held by a racist white family. But here she is. Here's Melissa. I'll let her introduce herself. Thank you, Melissa, for joining us today. Um, Super. Well, I don't know if excited is the word to talk about getting into this case, but super. It's going to be an interesting and important conversation, I think. But let everybody know, introduce yourselves to everybody, and then give everybody a sense of the case with Chanel.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. This case is very close to my heart. Like you mentioned, I'm a transracial adoptee. I was adopted into a white family back in '93. And Chanel's situation just called to me because I grew up with white parents that had a lot of prejudices against Latinos, against people of color. So I know what it's like. I know the ramifications. And I'm also an adopted educator. I wrote these two books, What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption and the accompanying workbook, which you can get at any bookstore. And over the past few years, I've taught at a lot of different agencies and adoption conferences. I've worked with social workers. I worked with therapists, adoption professionals, all around the world. And my whole platform is built to raise awareness about the nuances of adoption, particularly transracial adoption, because people often have this happily ever after view of a baby is adopted, a child is adopted, and they go off into the sunset and everything's fine and dandy. But the thing is, as research has developed over the years and studied adoptees and transracial adoptees in particular, they've found out that there are lasting, lifelong effects from the trauma of adoption. Because no matter the situation that the child was in, there's initial trauma at that maternal separation, that family separation. And adoptees are actually 4 times more likely to unalive themselves. They are more likely to have different disorders, anxiety, depression, health concerns. And these are topics that just aren't talked about. And so when I saw Chanel's case, I immediately, like I said, I felt kinship to her situation. And so Community X, Priscilla, there has been a huge group of advocates that have come together to bring Chanel home. She was in this very, very, very unfortunate situation with her father unalived, her mother, and then he ended up going to jail. He was convicted, and he still had parental rights to the baby. And
Which is
so
wild. Which is wild. I mean, you kill the mother, and then the father still gets parental rights,
it's
even
just
after he's convicted, even after he's sentenced.
yeah, it's just sickening. That just is one example of how the system is so broken. And so initially, Chanel went with the paternal grandparents, so the parents of the murderer. And they decided, not even like a month or two in, that they couldn't raise her. They didn't have the capacity. And then they just gave her to Nikki Richmond and Joseph Jerko. And so basically they were this random family. They weren't even registered or like foster families. They didn't go through that process. The baby was placed there, and then the father signed over power of attorney to that couple so they could take Chanel in. And so over time, things have come to light, and we've seen evidence of how racist they are. They've made so many comments about her being little native Mowgli. They've made comments about her doing physical labor for them. They've made so many disparaging comments about Indigenous people. And so when I saw that, like I said, like I felt so called to help, because I know what it's like. I work with adoptees every single day who have grown up in this environment where their parents have deep prejudices, and that leads to lifelong struggles with identity and depression and anxiety and all of these things. And people just see this couple and they're like, oh, well, they can't be racist, they took her in. But the thing is, that is completely not true. And it's kind of like the situation where we say, oh, I have a best friend that's Black, I can't be racist. Just because you adopt a child of color, that doesn't give you a get out of jail free card.
Even I've seen it. I saw you do a video about the whole situation with Grey's Anatomy, because I watched Grey's Anatomy, so I knew exactly what you're talking about. Baby Lola, right?
Yeah.
Even if you have, even if you are a white mother and have a baby with a Black man and have a biracial child, you still have racism inside of you that unconsciously, even if you try, is affecting the way you view and treat your child.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard for a lot of people to believe, because people think a mother's love is unconditional, which is nonsense, right? Love is love. It's an action, right? It's what you practice. And that's super interesting, but go on. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. And I tell parents all the time, like, they think that love is enough, but love isn't enough. It's a basis, and you have to build upon that. So a lot of my work is like teaching adopted parents, white adopted parents, about anti-racism work, about like doing the work and being comfortable admitting to them making mistakes. And when Nikki Richmond and Joseph Jerkel, like they have just compounded this issue, and Nikki even claimed Native ancestry, which has been proven to be a lie. She is a white woman, and there's nothing wrong with her being a white woman and him being a white man. What's wrong is that they are expressing prejudices publicly, loudly.
Yeah, I mean, Priscilla wrote a piece for us yesterday, and in the lead, as we say in media, in the first paragraph, she says, she describes right off the bat, she describes the parents as racist white parents, right? And at first, it's, I'm as a journalist, as an editor, I have to be careful how we label people. But then, so initially I just put white parents, right? But then looking at the posts, right? Baby Mowgli gathering firewood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. I mean, it's clear that they are racist. They have negative racial views towards Chanel as a Alaska Native child. And so I re-added racist white parents because that is actually accurate. It's just accurate.
It really is, and it's a hard pill to swallow for so many people. The cognitive dissonance involved when adoption, because so many people put adopted parents and foster parents on this pedestal. They can do no wrong. But we know the adoption industry is a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's based on placing children with wealthy, mostly white couples. 70% of adopted parents are white, and like a huge chunk of children in foster care are Black and brown. And then we have this system where we're supposed to listen to things like ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is literally the gold standard of adoption practices. And it says, place a baby with their biological family or within their tribe. Those are supposed to be the first two steps. And then you pick a foster family that is culturally competent. And then if that doesn't go through, then you could pick a different family. But the thing is, Chanel's grandmother has been deemed perfectly responsible and safe and loving. She's a biological relative, an immediate biological relative. She has Chanel's best interests at heart, and they're keeping her away from her tribe, from her people, and then exposing her to this racism on a daily basis. If people are so comfortable posting these things publicly, we have to consider what is happening behind closed doors. And as a transracial adoptee, so I'm a woman of color and I grew up in a white family, I know how dark it can get in those families. And when you're racially isolated, when your parents are white, your community is white, and everybody around you is white, it takes a toll on you, because you start questioning, like, well, you look up, you see the baby experiment where you give a baby a doll, you give her a white doll, a black doll, and you'll see a little black girl choose the white doll and say, she's beautiful, she's pretty, I want to be like her, I want to have blonde hair, I want to have straight hair. There are things that happen at a level when parents aren't providing these necessary racial mirrors and cultural assistance to make sure that they have these ties. And so that affects children lifelong. There are so many transracial adoptees who are struggling to this day.
I have very peripheral experience with that. You know, my high school sweetheart, who I ended up dating for 5 or 6 years, she was an adoptee from Seoul, Korea. Her adoptive parents, one was a Jewish mother, super kind, sweet, Japanese father, and she had identity issues, right? She, you know, I don't want to put words into her mouth, but you know, she kind of seemed to resent her being raised in a Jewish culture, because she was raised in a Jewish culture, went to temple and everything. You know, just didn't feel, she didn't have a sense of herself, and it affected her in her school and her social relationships, and so yeah, I mean, it's tough. You know, the other thing you're saying is that, like you're saying, these a lot of these adoptees, not only do black and brown adoptees often, especially in America, go unadopted, but then, like, isn't Guatemala the #1 exporter, quote unquote, if we can put it that way, of adoptive children? Like, they just have this whole industry in Guatemala, or in Korea.
It's everywhere. We see it in Korea. We see it in Colombia, where I was adopted from. There's so many different places. Russia was a huge problem back in the day. Vietnam, China with the one-child policy. And even people don't even know that in the United States, we're an exporter too. There are people adopting black children from the United States, and people don't realize that that happens. They think that only Americans adopt from other countries, but there are people who adopt black and brown babies from here, because many birth parents will say, well, I don't want my kid to grow up with this racism. And so people don't even realize that it's such a big issue, and we're over here trying to save kids, black and brown babies all over the world, and we're not even fixing the system here. Like, a lot of the reasons why birth parents will place their children is for financial reasons, and it takes about $2,000 to keep a family together. $2,000, and the average price of private adoption ranges anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000, and that fluctuates too. And they charge babies based on race, based on disability. They call babies special needs if they're black or brown. And there's just the issues that I could explain. It would take days, because it's so ingrained in this business, and it's for profit. And even now, the system, the child welfare system in the United States, a lot of times their hands are tied, and they're afraid to make these decisions, to say no to parents that they know that aren't equipped. I've talked to so many adoption professionals, and they say, well, my boss is pushing me to accept these families, because the more families adopt, the more money that is coming in.
That's wild. And just to bring up something you said in that video about Grey's Anatomy, you know, if a white parent is going to adopt a child of color, and they don't know about racism, don't care about racism, and more importantly, are not willing, as you said in that video, to do the work of anti-racism, don't adopt that child, because even though you may not think racism exists, or you don't see racism in your everyday, that your child, your adoptive child, will see racism in their life multiple times, as a person of color can tell you, right? But I mean, let's get back to Chanel. I mean, can you explain what ICWA is, and how it, like, pertains to this case?
Yeah. So unfortunately, because Chanel's case didn't go through the child welfare system, Chanel was placed with Nikki Richmond and Joseph Jerko by the grandparents and by the biological father. So they kind of surpassed.
Which grandparents? The paternal grandparents?
Paternal grandparents, and the maternal grandparents from the mother of Chanel. Her name is Arlene, and she is the one who was approved by the tribe, the Selawik, in order to get custody.
And the father's a white man, right?
I,
We should say
I'm pretty sure he's not
he's not
indigenous.
indigenous, right?
He's not indigenous, and so there was issues of abuse way before the murder of the mother, and so I know there were a bunch of issues with like thinking about the best interests of Chanel. And so when that happened, Chanel's grandmother immediately took action. She immediately wanted to take in Chanel. She had the home and she was deemed safe enough to do so. But the thing is, the power of attorney went to Nikki Richmond and Joseph Jerko. And so when Chanel's maternal grandmother, Arlene, went to go and take Chanel home, she had to get a writ in order to get permission to take, because you can't just go to someone's home and, you know, take a baby. But the court, by a judge, denied it. And so she wasn't able to take Chanel home. So now they're doing like this reissue of this case because they said that the Selawik tribe was biased and didn't take, what's her name, Nikki Richmond's position in consideration.
Which is wild to me that the court is putting the rights of some random white lady, basically, who the murderer father chose, right, to give their child to. He shouldn't have had parental rights. He shouldn't be making decisions for this child. The court, then this judge is choosing the rights of this white random person over the not only blood relatives, but the side of the family who is the victim in this case, right? Of the mother, right? Of the people who want and you know, especially when Nikki and her husband are showing racism online, right?
And that's not even all of it. Joseph Jerko has an extensive criminal record with drugs, with reckless driving. With
well, I'm sure. I mean, somebody doesn't just live a peaceful, calm life and then murder their wife one day. You know what I mean?
But this was the hopeful adoptive father, Joseph Jerko.
Oh, right. So I mean,
he's the one with the record. So even like if they had gone to adoption through proper means and went through the foster system, there's no way that they would have been approved. But then Nikki Richmond claimed Native ancestry and used that in her argument in court. So the judge was saying that they have to reevaluate everything. And so this is why this case is just a mess, honestly. And like any person who understands ICWA, any person in the child welfare system knows that family preservation should come first. Chanel should go with her biological father, not these random strangers. But now they're using the excuse of, oh, well, we can provide her with extracurriculars. We can provide her with a full wardrobe and all those things. So Community X and Priscilla and this whole entire team has created this GoFundMe, this petition. The petition has over 50,000 signatures. They've raised over $40,000 to support Chanel and her grandmother. They have the resources, they have the love, they have the connection to their tribe and their culture. And yet this hopeful adoptive couple who says that they have Chanel's best interests in hands is keeping her from that.
Wow. And one of those people is the account Bring Chanel Home. Super excited to have you on. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you want to, you know, what you can add to what Melissa's saying, and especially, you know, because this is a super complicated case, right?
Yeah, my name's Antonia. I'm actually the one that kind of exposed the racism online because I'd been advocating for it since December, and it just got to the point where I got tired of nobody doing anything. So it's out there now. But I want to add on to what Melissa is saying that Chanel's father is actually Native, but he's from a different tribe. I think he's been expelled from the tribe. I don't know if he was never enrolled or if they expelled him after he murdered my friend, but he is Native.
So I mean, it's not even like, even if that was a reason for this to stand, it's not like she's half white or something like that, right?
No.
She is full Native. So like this is even further removed from her culture, from her people, you know?
Exactly. Her dad is, I believe, Gwich'in Athabascan. So.
And so, I mean, what is I know there's a day of action plan for tomorrow. We'll get to that, but talk about the case first. The court appearance on Monday, which is the day of actions preceding that.
So the next hearing is on the 4th or the 17th, I'm sorry, and they extended it because her father claimed that he never received notice of the first hearing. So that's partially why they extended it. And then the second reason, I don't know. But I think they're just going to give him opportunity to present his own witnesses, and same with the foster mother. Aside from that, I don't think much else is going to happen that day.
And where's her father? I mean, he's been convicted, right? Is he in prison?
Yeah, he was convicted of murdering my friend Kristen this year, but he murdered her in 2020, and he is in prison here in Alaska.
And
So even if they didn't remove his rights when he murdered her in 2020, at the very least, they should have removed them when he was convicted this year. And then we wouldn't be doing all of this extra stuff for Chanel.
right. So and explain which is where, I guess the really complicated, and especially for somebody like me, and I'm sure a lot of people who are learning about the case, about the distinction between like tribal courts, tribal jurisdiction, and like federal jurisdiction, and why this is such a, where's this mess is created.
So tribal courts have jurisdiction over their tribal members, and that always trumps state or Supreme Court. So the tribal court has the distinction to choose what happens to their tribal members, no matter what the state or the Supreme Court says. So this judge that's in Fairbanks saying that, oh, you didn't give the foster mother due process and all this extra stuff, it doesn't matter, because the tribal court has the authority to decide how their tribal courts work. They don't have to do the formal things that state court does, due process, all this, she's just making up things, and she's prolonging this process, and she's been doing it for years. Like, it needs to stop right now.
And so is it it's basically the federal courts thumbing their nose at tribal rights, tribal jurisdiction, right?
It's the state court, not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court actually told them, you do not have the right to question the Selawik tribal courts. So it's the state court judge that is giving her the opportunity to drag it on.
So is that their end game, that to appeal up to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, that's what they did back in December. The Supreme Court shut them down. So it went from tribal court, then they appealed to the state court, who said, you're right, you weren't given your due process. And then she appealed to the Supreme Court that told her, you're wasting our time. Like, you do not have the authority to question the tribal court. So they shut her down at the Supreme Court. So they're going back to the tribal court to try to fix all of these things that judge and state court had to complain about, so that when they go back to him in, after this hearing on Monday to try to get the writ of assistance, he needs to approve it.
And yeah, I'm not in Alaska. What is the sense there with tribal members and in Alaska? And I would think if this was happening in my state, I'm in Nevada, which is also tribal lands, right? I mean, this is all tribal lands, but there's a very strong tribal presence here.
Yeah.
That it would be big news.
It is on social media. I've actually been trying to contact the local media, and I've been getting like silence left and right. They've asked me a couple of questions and then they just stop, which is it's very sad. But I don't have the best relationship with the media anyway, because of other things I've done in advocacy. So,
well, I mean, Latino Rebels, I hope, is getting a reputation for being kind of different than the rest of the media.
Yeah.
But Melissa, can you talk about, obviously, I encourage everybody to go to, bringchanelhome.com, see the piece that Priscilla wrote, we published yesterday at latinorebels.com. Just get a sense of the just really nasty, racist stuff that they're, like you said, they're posting online. So, imagine what's going on behind closed doors. But, you through your work probably hear all kinds of horror stories. I mean, how dark does it get?
There have been so many cases. I have a good friend who's biracial, a Black adoptee, and she was completely terrorized by her adopted parents. They hated Black people. They refused to allow her to incorporate her culture and treated her horrifically. There have been so many cases of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse of adoptees. And the thing is, there's so little follow through when it comes to adoption. People will adopt babies, and then just like with my family, for example, they adopted me. They had nobody checking in on me. And so they didn't tell me that I was adopted. And I found out at 19 years old. Like, there is so little regulation about adoption practices, and we are seeing these tactics that unfortunately some adoptive parents have, where they're dragging out court cases. They are doing horrible things so they can indoctrinate and have children raised in their cultures and their beliefs without anybody complaining. And so one of the things that I'm seeing with this case with Nikki Rich and Joseph Jerko is that extending the court time, they are extending how long they have Chanel in their care. And so when it comes down to it, seeing a court case, they're going to use the argument most likely of, well, we're all that Chanel knows. We're all that she knows. She's been with us for so many years. You just want to take a baby and bring her to a completely different area and community and see her grandmother, who she barely knows anymore. They use all these excuses with this American culture at the forefront, where the priorities are money, college and extracurriculars and all these things, and are pushing their beliefs on an indigenous child whose culture.
And that is their main argument right now, is that Chanel only knows them, but that is only because they prolonged this so long. They filed motion after motion, and they're saying she only knows us, but that's only because they're making Chanel's actual family forced strangers. They do not allow her to build a relationship with her grandmother, and they're not very open to, you know, when Arlene shows up in Fairbanks, they're not open to her doing visitation, and the foster mom is very rude about it. And she says, you need to give me like this many weeks of notice. And, you know, a lot of the times Arlene just has to show up, and she was in Fairbanks quite a bit for the murder trial, and she was barely allowed to see her. And Chanel's own brother lives in Fairbanks and hasn't seen her since last spring. So that says a lot about her wanting to build relationships with Chanel's actual family.
Oh, so she has siblings. Chanel has siblings. Who are they living with?
His grandparents and his father.
So it looks like the white the white side of this case, I guess, right? Is trying to go for the old legal maxim of possession's 9/10 of the law, but that doesn't work with people. And that sends a chilling precedent for kidnappers. Imagine I can kidnap somebody for 10 years.
It's legal kidnapping, basically.
Right, because I've had them for 10 years and I'm all they know. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And the irony here is that the United States child welfare system has no problem taking brown and black kids from their families and ripping those families apart. But when a white couple has an adoptive child, all of a sudden, that's all they've ever known.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't imagine this case the other way around. You can't imagine a tribe holding on to a white child and the white court siding with the tribe. You just can't imagine it because it would never happen. But, I mean, obviously, the issue of money was brought up that, the white family saying that they can provide more for Chanel. But I know, from my own past, like in my own hometown, suburb of Chicago, there was this white family who would, and this is dark, but they would adopt, the white daughters were in high school, and they would date black kids at our school, right? This is very well known. People who know me or know this is true. They would date these black guys and friends of mine, and the parents ended up adopting these black guys because they were still minors, and it was only a ploy to get extra money from the government, right? It was only a ploy. They did not care about them at all. My friends barely lived there, like hardly at all. They had no rights to anything in the house. They weren't treated like kids at all. So because I'm thinking if these white people are racist, why do they want Chanel so bad?
I can't answer that for them, but I think this whole situation is stemming from the murderer himself wanting so badly to separate Chanel from the person that he murdered's family. So the abuse is starting from him, and he's just using all these extra people to prolong that abuse, even though she's dead. He, he
And
he's very deranged himself.
and unfortunately, for the reason I can't speak for Nikki Richmond and Joseph Jerko, but what I've seen in the adoption space is that adoptive parents want babies so bad. And there is what the Supreme referred to as the domestic supply issue of infants and babies. So there are not enough infants and babies in the United States per couple looking to adopt. And so they are a precious commodity that the industry has created here. So we have so many white adoptive parents who will take in Black and brown babies as a second option because there aren't enough white babies available. And so what happens is they try not to see them as Black and brown. You're not one of them. I don't see color. That's what we hear all the time. I don't see color. I treat everybody the same. But then at the end of the day, we have situations where we have a Joseph Jerko and Nikki Richmond posting these things and saying these things.
That's really gross.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, this whole thing is gross. I mean, again, go to bringchanelhome.com to read more about it and follow these accounts. But talk about the day of action tomorrow.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up, guys. Go find this. Let's talk. I don't know if you could read that backwards, but it's posted on the Bring Chanel Home Facebook page, all over Instagram. But so we're going to have a day of action tomorrow on the 14th, and we're just asking anybody, any of our supporters, to participate. You can wear blue and white, which is the silhouette colors. You can write Bring Chanel Home on your vehicle. It's written all over mine right now. I just left the gym, so I'm in my truck. Post a photo of yourself to your social media and then tag #Bring Chanel Home. And then there's also a toolkit with different ideas on www.bringchanelhome.com that Adam will be posting, or maybe did yesterday, I'm not sure. But there's lots of ideas. We just wanted, really simple things that everybody could participate in from their homes. And, we just want to blast social media starting tomorrow, all weekend up until the hearing, to show them how much support there is and how much pressure we need to put on them to do the right thing. Everybody's watching them.
It's pretty wild that this is, I mean, it's not wild that it's not getting the media attention that it should be getting, because as we know, Indigenous women go, disappear more than any other, proportionally more than any other group, and nobody talks about it. We just had this case with a 13-year-old girl at Camp Pendleton, right? I mean, and you would think this is national news, and then you go to the news channels and nobody talks about it. You only hear about it on social media.
I literally had to go searching on TikTok for videos about that. It's not just popping up for me. I have to go search for it.
Which is wild. And it kind of ties into this whole, I don't know if you heard about this conspiracy theory. My 19-year-old daughter told me about it, and it's creepy that movie that just came out with human trafficking that is seemingly being ignored in movie theaters, and nobody's doing reviews of it.
Yeah, that's popping up on my TikTok, and that actually made me want to go watch it today. I think I'm going to go watch it later. But I saw videos of people saying, their movie theater is saying their AC is not working, so it discourages people from going to watch it. And I'm like, why would they do that? But it's happening all over, which is crazy.
And no major outlet, New York Times, nobody's done a review of this movie. It's just completely being ignored. Weird. Super weird. So this is all tied into what is going on in this country, right? I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's pretty wild what's going on.
I can speak for Alaska, and they pick and choose what they want to put in the news, and it's never anything about Alaska Natives. It's never anything about missing and murdered Indigenous women, because that's something I fight for with my whole being, because 2 of my best friends were murdered in Fairbanks, and one of them is Chanel's mother. And I had to claw at them to put their stories in the media, literally fight them.
And not to pull this out of left field, but in my mind, it's connected. As a Puerto Rican, I'm for Puerto Rican independence, and this is just another case of if you think that Puerto Rico becoming a state is going to give more rights to Native Puerto Ricans, Ask a native Alaskan, ask a native Hawaiian how much rights you get by becoming a state. It's just an easier way to ignore you.
Yep.
But I mean, I want to thank you both ladies for coming on. Any final thoughts, things you want people to know? Again, go to bringchanelhome.com, use the hashtag, search for it on social media, because again, you're not going to find it on the news. But the day of action tomorrow.
Go find this online. Do all the things.
Do all the
Thank
things.
you. Thank you so much for having us. I think going to bringchanel.com has all the things over there, and some people will think like, oh, well, it's not helping that much. Bringing awareness to this issue is going to put pressure on the courts, on the news, to hold them accountable for their actions, because all of us are watching, and
Yeah.
we're more powerful working together.
The only reason I started all this was the goal was to tell her story to as many people as possible so that they know people are watching them. That was my only goal, and I think I did that.
Yeah, I mean, again, and it seems like it's growing too, you know, the awareness of it. And so let's see what happens. You know, everybody do the day of action tomorrow, and let's hope that Monday is the beginning of a shift in bringing Chanel home, because it would be wild now. You know, they've gotten away with it because it's been kept under the rug, but it would be crazy if Chanel isn't, you know, brought home after all this attention. But I think we'll all be watching, and that's thanks to you both. And you know, bring Chanel home. Bring Chanel home, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Peace,
Thank you so much.
guys. Peace.
Thank you.